Mom, we didn't buy you a present this year. Those 8 words hit harder than the icy Vermont wind outside my window. I smiled anyway, because mothers learn to hide broken hearts better than anyone. After 67 years of life, I thought nothing could surprise me anymore. Then before anyone spoke another word, a massive delivery truck pulled into my snow-covered driveway. The driver climbed out, looked straight at me and asked, "Are you Donna Jackson?" At that moment, I had no idea that the Christmas I believed would become my loneliest would uncover a secret my late husband had been protecting for 12 long years. If this story touches your heart, I'd love for you to stay with me until the end. Please like and subscribe if stories about family love and second chances mean something to you. And before we continue, tell me in the comments, what time is it where you're watching from, where in the world are you, and what would you have felt if your own daughter had told you, "We didn't buy you a present"? For a few seconds, no one moved. The delivery truck sat quietly in my driveway, its engine humming beneath a blanket of falling snow. Inside the house, the fire crackled in the fireplace, but somehow, the room felt colder than it had a minute earlier. I looked at Sarah. She looked away. Michael suddenly became very interested in the coffee cup in his hands. Olivia stopped smiling. Even little Noah, who normally couldn't stay still for more than 30 seconds, stood frozen beside the Christmas tree. That was when I realized something wasn't right. Not just the truck. The whole morning. Maybe even the last few weeks. I forced another smile. "It's okay," I said softly. "You don't have to look so guilty. Presents aren't important." Sarah nodded too quickly. "I know, Mom." Her voice cracked. I just... She stopped talking. That wasn't like my daughter. Sarah had always been able to find the right words. When she was 5, she'd explain why the sky looked different after a storm. When she was 16, she'd convince me that staying out another hour wasn't a terrible idea. When she became a nurse, she somehow found the perfect words for frightened patients. But now, she couldn't even finish one sentence. I felt something tighten in my chest. Not anger, not yet, just confusion. The delivery driver knocked on the front door again. "Mrs. Donna Jackson." "I'm here. I'll need your signature before we unload the shipment." "Shipment? Yes, ma'am. I wasn't expecting anything." "I understand." He held out a clipboard. "It can only be released to you." "Only me." I frowned. "What exactly is it?" "I'm sorry." He smiled politely. "I've been instructed not to discuss the contents." That answer only created more questions. I signed my name anyway. As the driver walked back outside, I caught Michael glancing toward Sarah again. A silent conversation passed between them. One look, one nod. Then they both looked at me. Something was happening. I simply didn't know what. While the crew prepared to unload whatever had arrived, my thoughts drifted somewhere I hadn't expected. Backward. Way backward. Christmas had never been about expensive gifts in our house. Not after David died. The first Christmas without him, Sarah was only 28. She tried so hard to make everything feel normal. She decorated the tree. She baked cookies. She wrapped little presents she'd bought with money she barely had. That year, I secretly returned every gift she'd given me to the store. Not because I didn't love them. Because I knew she needed the money more than I needed another sweater. She never found out. Or at least, I thought she never did. After David passed away, life became simple. Wake up, go to work, pay bills, come home, repeat. There wasn't much room for dreams. Teaching elementary school paid enough to survive, not enough to get ahead. So I started tutoring children after school, then grading papers for another district. During summers, I worked at the public library. Some nights, I barely slept 4 hours. People used to ask me why I worked so much. The answer was always the same. Because Sarah deserves choices I never had. I meant every word. When Sarah was accepted into nursing school, tuition terrified her. She cried in my kitchen, "Mom, I can't afford this." I smiled. "Yes, you can." She never knew I'd emptied nearly every savings account I had. She thought scholarships covered everything. They didn't. When she married Michael, she wanted a small wedding. She kept apologizing. "I'm sorry it isn't bigger." I laughed. "Honey, your father and I got married in a church basement." She smiled. She never knew I quietly paid most of the venue deposit. Years later, when she and Michael found their first house, they almost lost it because they couldn't afford the down payment. 2 weeks later, a mysterious cashier's check arrived. Anonymous. They assumed someone had made a banking mistake. It wasn't. That money came from selling David's old pickup truck. The truck he'd loved. The truck I'd promised never to sell. Sometimes love means breaking promises to the dead, so you can keep promises to the living. I never regretted it. Not once. Every sacrifice felt worth it. Every overtime shift, every missed vacation, every worn-out pair of shoes because someone else needed new ones first. I never kept score. That's what mothers do. Or at least, that's what I believed. Until this morning. Until my own daughter looked me in the eyes and said, "We didn't buy you a present." I hated myself for caring. I really did. At 67 years old, why should one sentence matter so much? It wasn't about a gift. It was about feeling remembered, seen, valued. Christmas has a strange way of uncovering feelings you've buried all year. I stood near the living room window and watched the men outside. They lowered the truck's lift gate. Something large sat inside beneath thick moving blankets, too large to fit through my front door without turning it sideways. "What on earth?" I whispered. Olivia walked beside me. She slipped her small hand into mine. Grandchildren always know when your heart hurts, even before adults admit it. "Grandma." "Yes, sweetheart? Are you sad?" Children don't ask complicated questions, only honest ones. I squeezed her hand. "Just thinking." She tilted her head. "You always say thinking makes your forehead wrinkle." Despite everything, I laughed. A tiny laugh, but a real one. She smiled too. Then Noah ran over. "Grandma, they're bringing something huge." "I can see that. Do you think it's a boat?" "A boat." He nodded enthusiastically. "In the snow." Michael chuckled. "I don't think it's a boat, buddy." Noah shrugged. "It could be." For one brief moment, the tension disappeared, just long enough for me to remember why I loved Christmas in the first place. Not because of presents, because families laugh together. Then I noticed Sarah again. She wasn't laughing. She looked scared. Not nervous. Scared. Her eyes followed every movement the workers made, as if one wrong step might ruin something important, or reveal something too soon. I walked over quietly. "Sarah?" She jumped. "Oh, Mom! Is there something you're not telling me?" "No." The answer came too fast, too rehearsed. She immediately added, "I mean, you'll understand soon." Soon? What did that mean? Before I could ask another question, the driver opened the front door. "Mrs. Jackson?" "Yes, we're ready." I followed him outside. The cold air stung my face. Snowflakes drifted slowly through the gray December sky. The workers carefully removed the thick blankets. For the first time, I caught sight of polished wood beneath them. Not cardboard, not furniture, not an appliance. It looked old, beautifully old, as though someone had spent years protecting it. My heartbeat quickened. Something about it felt strangely familiar. I couldn't explain why. Not yet. The men carried the wooden chest with unbelievable care. Not one of them rushed. Not one of them spoke. It took 4 people just to move it across my porch. The polished cedar caught the winter sunlight, glowing with a rich amber color I hadn't seen in years. Brass corners protected every edge, and delicate carvings of pine branches wrapped around the lid. Whoever had made it had poured love into every inch. I couldn't stop staring. "I know this wood," I whispered. Sarah looked at me. "What do you mean?" "I've seen something like it before." I stepped closer. My fingers trembled as I brushed away a thin layer of snow from the lid. The scent hit me instantly. Cedar. Fresh. Warm. Exactly the same smell that used to fill David's workshop every Saturday morning. For a second, I wasn't standing on my snowy front porch anymore. I was 30 years younger. David was wearing his old flannel shirt. Country music played softly on the radio. Wood shavings covered the floor while he smiled over another weekend project. He always said cedar lasted forever. "If you build something with cedar," he'd tell me, "it'll outlive both of us." Back then I laughed. Now those words echoed in my mind. Outlive both of us. The delivery driver interrupted my thoughts. "Mrs. Jackson." "Yes. There's one more item." He reached into the truck and carefully removed a cream-colored envelope sealed with dark red wax. This was attached separately. My hands froze before I even touched it, because I already knew. Somehow, I already knew. The handwriting. Just 3 words. Donna Jackson. No one had written my name that way in 12 years. Every letter leaned slightly to the right. The capital D always looped twice. The final N always curled underneath. I had seen that handwriting on birthday cards, anniversary notes, lunchbox messages, Christmas tags. Thousands of times. My breathing became shallow. "No," I whispered. "It can't be." Sarah stepped beside me. "What is it, Mom?" I turned the envelope toward her. She gasped. "Oh my God!" Michael's face lost all color. "That's..." He didn't finish. He didn't have to. Everyone knew. David, my late husband. The man we'd buried 12 Christmases ago. His handwriting was sitting in my hands. Olivia looked confused. "Grandma? Why are you crying?" Only then did I realize tears had already begun running down my cheeks. I hadn't even noticed. I couldn't answer. My voice simply disappeared. The driver quietly removed his cap. "I'm sorry to interrupt, ma'am. Did someone tell you who sent this?" He shook his head. "No, ma'am." "Who hired your company?" "I only received transportation instructions." "When?" "This shipment was transferred through several legal storage facilities." Legal storage transferred. How long had this been traveling? I looked back at the envelope. The paper wasn't new. It had yellowed slightly around the edges. The wax seal remained perfectly intact. On the front beneath my name, another line caught my attention. To be delivered only on December 25th. No year, just Christmas Day. I suddenly felt dizzy. Michael pulled out a chair from the dining room. "Donna, sit down." I didn't argue. My knees had already become weak. Everyone gathered around the dining table. No one touched the chest. No one said a word. Outside, snow continued falling. Inside, the only sound came from the ticking clock above the fireplace. Tick, tick, tick. Almost as if time itself had slowed down. I held the envelope carefully, afraid that if I squeezed too hard, the moment would disappear. Olivia leaned closer. Can you open it? I hesitated. Could I? Part of me desperately wanted to know what was inside. Another part feared discovering I had imagined everything. Maybe someone had copied David's handwriting. Maybe this was an elaborate mistake. Maybe grief was playing tricks on me. 12 years is a long time. Long enough to question your own memories. Sarah gently placed her hand over mine. It's okay, Mom. Her eyes looked as emotional as mine. I think Dad would want you to read it. Dad. She still called him Dad. Even after all these years, that simple word made my heart ache. I slowly broke the wax seal. The room became so quiet I could hear the paper unfolding. One sheet, folded 3 times, cream-colored, exactly the stationery David always bought. His favorite fountain pen had left dark blue ink across the page. Even the tiny smudge near the signature looked familiar. David always rested his hand before the ink dried. Some habits never changed. I smiled through my tears. Then I began reading aloud. My dearest Donna. My voice immediately cracked. No one spoke. I tried again. My dearest Donna. If you're reading this, then Christmas has finally arrived exactly as I hoped it would. I stopped. Exactly as I hoped. What did that mean? I continued. I know something happened before this letter reached your hands. I know your heart probably hurts. I also know you're wondering why. My breathing stopped. He knew. Somehow, he knew. I looked at Sarah. She stared silently at the table. David's letter continued. Please forgive everyone before you know the whole story. They've carried a burden longer than you can imagine. I blinked. Everyone? Not just Sarah. I glanced around the room. Michael wouldn't look at me. Olivia looked confused. Noah was quietly swinging his feet beneath the chair, not understanding why every adult suddenly seemed close to crying. I read another line. Most importantly, please do not open the chest. The room collectively inhaled. I looked toward the beautiful cedar chest sitting only a few feet away. David had specifically written, do not open it. Not yet. Why? The next sentence answered nothing. Everything has its proper time. You've waited this long. Please trust me a little longer. Trust me. Those words hurt in the strangest way. Because trusting David had always been easy. He never broke promises, never lied, never played games. Even during his final days in hospice, when every breath hurt, he still worried more about comforting me than himself. He had earned my trust 1,000 times over. And yet, as I looked at the mysterious chest, every instinct told me to lift the lid. Just one peek, just enough to know. But David had asked me not to, even after death. I found myself listening. Sarah quietly asked, "What does the rest say?" I looked back at the letter. There isn't much more. Only 4 short lines remained. Someone will soon arrive. He has kept my promise. Listen before you judge. And remember, my greatest Christmas gift to you was never wrapped. The letter ended simply. Forever yours, David. No dramatic farewell, no goodbye. Just his name. Exactly as he'd signed every anniversary card for 43 years. I carefully folded the letter. No one moved. The silence felt heavier than before. Finally, Michael whispered, "Someone is coming." I think so. But who? Before anyone could answer? Another vehicle slowly pulled into my driveway. Not the delivery truck, a dark gray sedan. It stopped beside the mailbox. The driver's door opened, An elderly man stepped out, tall, gray-haired, wearing a long black wool coat. He looked toward my house, then toward the cedar chest. When our eyes met, recognition hit me like lightning. I hadn't seen him in nearly 20 years, yet I knew exactly who he was. Richard Jackson, David's older brother. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. Richard Jackson. The last time I had seen my husband's older brother David was still alive. The memory wasn't pleasant. Voices had been raised. Doors had slammed. After that, Richard disappeared from our lives as if he had never existed. David never spoke much about him again. Neither did I. Yet here he was, standing at the end of my snow-covered walkway. Older. His hair had turned completely white. His shoulders were slightly bent, but those piercing blue eyes were exactly the same. He looked at me with an expression I couldn't read. Regret. Sadness. Maybe both. No one spoke until he slowly walked toward the porch. Every step seemed deliberate, as if he had imagined this moment for years. He stopped a few feet away. "Hello, Donna." His voice was softer than I remembered. I stared at him. "What are you doing here?" He lowered his eyes. "I know you have questions. You think—" The words came out sharper than I intended. 12 years of grief, 20 years of silence, all crashing together. Sarah quietly whispered, "Mom." I raised my hand. "No." I never took my eyes off Richard. "You don't get to appear on Christmas morning after disappearing for 2 decades without an explanation." Richard nodded. "You're right. So start talking." Instead of answering immediately, he looked toward the cedar chest. "I see it arrived safely." That sentence irritated me even more. "You knew about this?" "Yes." "You sent it?" "No." "Then who did?" He met my eyes. "David did." I almost laughed, not because it was funny, because it sounded impossible. "My husband has been dead for 12 years. "I know." "So, explain how a dead man arranged this." "I will." His answer was calm. Too calm, almost rehearsed. I folded my arms. "I'm listening." Richard glanced toward the children. "May we go inside?" I hesitated. Every instinct told me to send him away. But David's letter echoed inside my head. "Listen before you judge." I hated how those words still carried power over me. Finally, I stepped aside. "Come in." Richard quietly entered the house. The room suddenly felt crowded. He removed his coat and carefully placed it over a chair. No one offered him coffee. No one smiled. Michael finally broke the silence. "Would anyone like to sit?" Richard nodded. "Thank you." We gathered around the dining table again. The cedar chest remained untouched beside the fireplace, almost as though it were another person listening to our conversation. Richard looked directly at me. "I owe you an apology." "You owe me much more than that." "I know." Another pause. Then he surprised me. "I never abandoned David." I frowned. "Excuse me." "I never abandoned my brother." My heartbeat quickened. That wasn't the story I'd believed for 20 years. "You disappeared because David asked me to." I shook my head. "No." "It's true." "No." "He made me promise." "No." I stood so quickly my chair nearly tipped over. "My husband spent the last years of his life believing his own brother wanted nothing to do with him." Richard's face tightened. "He never believed that." "He cried because of you." "I cried too." "Liar." The word escaped before I could stop it. Sarah quietly whispered, "Mom?" I ignored her. Richard didn't defend himself. Instead, he slowly reached into his leather briefcase. I expected this reaction. He removed a thick manila folder. Old, worn. The edges had softened with time. He slid it across the table toward me. What is this high proof? I don't need paperwork. You do. His voice remained gentle. Please look. Reluctantly, I opened the folder. Inside were dozens of documents. Legal papers, letters, notarized forms, bank records, everything neatly organized. One page immediately caught my attention. David's signature. I recognized it instantly. Every curve, every stroke. It wasn't a copy. It was original. The document was dated 6 months before David died. I looked closer. My eyes widened. Richard wasn't lying. David had appointed Richard as trustee for something. The page clearly stated that Richard was legally responsible for following David's final instructions. My hands began trembling again. I turned another page. Another signature. Another date. Another legal witness. Everything looked authentic. Michael leaned over carefully. I think these are real. I know they're real, Sarah quietly added. I've seen some of them before. I looked at her. You have? She nodded. Richard contacted me several years ago. What? I couldn't tell you. My head snapped toward her. You've known him all this time? She looked devastated. I'm sorry. You've been keeping secrets from me. Tears immediately filled her eyes. I had to. Had to. I promised Dad. The room became silent again. Too many secrets. Too many surprises. One Christmas morning had suddenly become 12 years of unanswered questions. I rubbed my temples. I don't understand any of this. Richard spoke softly. You will. When? Soon. I've heard that word enough today. For the first time, a faint smile crossed Richard's face. You sound exactly like David. That sentence caught me off guard. Exactly like David. No one had compared me to my husband in years. I almost forgot how often people used to say we thought alike. Finished each other's sentences. Shared the same stubbornness. Richard continued. David knew you would ask questions. Of course I would. He also knew you wouldn't believe me. He's right. Richard nodded. I expected that too. He carefully removed one final envelope from the folder. Unlike the others, this one looked newer. Not new, but better preserved. Across the front in David's handwriting were only 6 words. Open after Richard arrives safely. I stared at the envelope. Another letter. Another impossible letter. How many had David written? Richard pushed it toward me. I've carried this in my possession for 12 years. 12 years? Every Christmas. You kept it with you? Yes. What if something happened to you? He smiled sadly. I asked myself that question every year. The room felt impossibly quiet. Outside, snow continued falling. Inside, every answer only created more questions. I picked up the envelope. It felt strangely heavy. Not because of the paper, because of everything it represented. Trust, secrets, promises, years of waiting. I slowly opened it. David's handwriting appeared once again. This time, the message was much shorter. Donna, if Richard is standing in front of you, then he has kept every promise I asked him to keep. Please don't punish him for obeying me. I know you'll want explanations. They're coming. But first, remember one conversation we had during my last Christmas, the one about surprises. Love, David. I read the last sentence again. One conversation during his last Christmas. Something stirred deep inside my memory. A hospital room. Christmas lights hanging crookedly in the corner. David smiling despite the pain. He had said something strange, something I hadn't understood. At the time, I thought the medication had made him emotional. Now, for the first time, I wondered if he'd been planning this all along. I closed my eyes. The hospital room came back to me as clearly as if I had walked into it yesterday. It had been David's last Christmas. The nurses had taped paper snowflakes to the windows. Someone had placed a tiny artificial tree beside his bed. Christmas music drifted through the hallway, trying to make the oncology floor feel less heartbreaking. David had smiled all day, not because he wasn't dying, because he didn't want me to spend his last Christmas crying. That was who he was, always protecting me, even when he was the one who needed protecting. I remembered sitting beside his bed, holding his hand. His skin had already become thin. His wedding ring hung loosely on his finger. He looked at me and suddenly asked, "Donna, do you still like surprises?" I laughed. "What kind of question is that?" "The important kind." "I suppose I do." He smiled. "No." I frowned. "What do you mean, no?" "You only like surprises when you know they'll end well." I rolled my eyes. "That's because I married a man who once hid my anniversary present inside the washing machine." He laughed so hard, the nurse peeked through the door. "I thought you'd find it." "I nearly called a repairman." He laughed even harder. Then his smile slowly faded. "Promise me something." "What?" "If life ever gives you one last surprise from me." He paused to catch his breath. "Don't ruin it by opening it too early." I kissed his forehead. "You've been taking too much pain medicine." He smiled again. "Maybe. Back then, I thought it was simply another sentimental conversation. Now, 12 years later," his words suddenly made perfect sense. I opened my eyes. Richard was watching me quietly. "You remembered?" I nodded slowly. "He planned this?" "Yes." "For how long?" Richard inhaled deeply. "Longer than you imagine." I leaned forward. "I want the truth." "You deserve it." Richard folded his hands on the table. "About 8 months before David passed away, he called me." "You weren't speaking." "I know." "So why did he call you?" "Because he needed someone he could trust with something impossible." I looked toward the cedar chest. "This," Richard nodded. "This," he continued. "I drove to the hospital that evening." "You visited him 3 times?" I stared at him. "I never saw you." "You weren't supposed to." "What?" "David arranged every visit while you were home sleeping." My heart skipped. "He told me you hadn't slept properly in weeks." That was true. I barely slept at all. "He wanted you to rest." "So while I slept, you thought he was sleeping too?" I slowly sat back. How much had happened that I never knew? Richard continued. "He asked me to become responsible for one final project." "What project?" "The greatest Christmas gift he could ever give you." I glanced at the chest again. "I don't understand." "You will." "Everyone keeps saying that." Richard smiled sadly. "I know." He reached into his briefcase again. This time, he removed several photographs. Old photographs. He handed me the first one. I gasped. It showed David sitting in a woodworking shop. He looked thinner than I remembered, but he was smiling. Beside him was the unfinished cedar chest. My fingers tightened around the photo. "He built it." Richard nodded. "Mostly." "He was already sick." "Very sick. He couldn't have." He insisted. Another photograph. David sanding one side of the chest, another. David carving pine branches into the lid, another. David smiling proudly beside it. My vision blurred with tears. He told me, Richard said quietly, that if his hands could leave you one final gift, he wanted them to build something that would last longer than he would. I pressed the photographs against my chest. David had spent his final strength making something for me. Something I had never known existed. Richard continued. He worked only a few minutes each day. Why didn't he tell me? Because he knew you would stop him. He was right. I would have. I would have begged him to save every ounce of strength, not spend it in a workshop. Richard smiled softly. He said you'd argue. I laughed through my tears. I definitely would. He knew. That sounded exactly like David. Stubborn, thoughtful, impossible to change once he'd made up his mind. Richard pointed toward one corner of the chest. Look carefully. I walked over, near the bottom edge, almost hidden beneath one carved pine branch, were two tiny letters, DJ David Jackson, his initials. He had signed his work, exactly the way he signed every bookshelf toy box and picture frame he ever built. My fingertips traced the carving. For a moment, it felt as though I was touching his hands. Sarah quietly walked beside me. I never knew Dad actually built it. You didn't? She shook her head. Richard never showed us pictures. I wasn't allowed, Richard explained. David wanted every discovery to happen today. Every answer somehow made the mystery bigger. I turned back toward Richard. The letter said you kept a promise. I did. What promise? I promised not to let this chest reach you until every condition had been met. Conditions? Yes. What conditions? Richard hesitated. I can't tell you all of them yet. I sighed. Of course not, but I can tell you one. I waited. The chest could never be delivered while you were still working? That surprised me. My retirement. Richard nodded. David specifically wrote that. I blinked. He expected me to retire. He expected you to work far longer than you should. I almost laughed. He knew me too well. He absolutely did. Richard opened another folder. Inside was a typed document. Across the top it read, Release Conditions. Most of the page was covered. Only one line remained visible. Condition 4. Donna Jackson must have officially retired from teaching. Everything else had been hidden beneath protective paper. You can't show me the rest. Not yet. Why? Because David specifically instructed me not to. I looked at the ceiling. I've never been this frustrated on Christmas. Michael finally spoke. I think David knew exactly what he was doing. I know he did. But why all the secrecy? Richard answered. Because surprises only work when they're protected. The room became quiet again. Then Olivia walked toward the chest. She looked at the carved pine branches. It's beautiful. It is, I whispered. She smiled. Great-grandpa made this? Yes. She carefully touched the wood. Then it already feels like a hug. Every adult in the room suddenly became emotional. Children often say the simplest truths. I smiled through fresh tears. You're right. Richard checked his watch. The next step can begin. I frowned. What next step? He looked directly at me. Now. You may finally open the chest. No one moved. Richard's words hung in the air. Now, you may finally open the chest. I looked at the cedar chest again. For hours, it had been nothing but a mystery. Now it felt almost sacred. I wasn't afraid of what might be inside. I was afraid of what it might make me feel. I slowly walked toward it. Every step echoed through the quiet living room. The brass latch caught the glow of the Christmas tree lights. I reached out, then stopped. My hand hovered just above the lid. "I can't," I whispered. Sarah stepped closer. "Mom, what if—" My voice shook. "What if this is the last thing David ever touched?" Richard answered softly. It was. Those 2 words broke something inside me. For 12 years, I had believed the last thing David left me was his wedding ring. Now I realized he had left something else, something he had built with his own hands. I placed both palms on the cedar. The wood still felt smooth. I closed my eyes. "I miss you," I whispered. No one interrupted, not even Noah. Children somehow understand when silence is more important than words. Finally, I lifted the brass latch. Click. The sound was surprisingly loud, almost like opening a door that had been locked for years. I inhaled deeply, then slowly raised the lid. The cedar released a warm, familiar scent. For one incredible second, it smelled exactly like David's workshop. Fresh cedar, wood polish, a hint of pine. I could almost hear his saw humming in the background. My eyes filled with tears again. Inside the chest, everything had been perfectly organized. Nothing looked random. David had planned every inch. Right on top lay a folded, cream-colored blanket. I recognized it immediately. "Our camping blanket?" I whispered. Sarah leaned over. "The one Dad always packed?" I nodded. "We bought it on our honeymoon." 44 years earlier, it still looked almost new. I carefully lifted it. Beneath it sat a stack of leather-bound journals. Each one had a year written on the cover. Year 1, Year 2, Year 3. I frowned. Richard smiled. He started writing after his diagnosis. I picked up the first journal. The leather felt worn from use. Every page inside was filled with David's handwriting. Not rushed, not messy, patient, careful, just like him. I gently placed it beside me. There would be time to read later. Next to the journals rested dozens of photographs tied together with blue ribbon. Some I had never seen before. One showed David holding baby Sarah in the hospital. Another captured me asleep on the couch with a toddler curled against my shoulder. "I didn't know he took this." "He always carried a camera," Sarah whispered. "I know. But he never showed me half of these." Richard nodded. "He wanted you to discover moments you didn't know he'd saved." I smiled sadly. That sounded exactly like David. He loved preserving ordinary moments. He always said ordinary days become extraordinary memories. Under the photographs lay a small wooden box. I opened it. Inside were Christmas ornaments. Handmade, every single one. Tiny carved snowflakes, little wooden angels, miniature houses. Each one had a year written underneath. I laughed softly. "He secretly made these." Sarah picked one up. "I thought you bought them." "So did I." Richard chuckled. "He enjoyed letting you think that." Even after all these years, David was still surprising me. Beside the ornaments sat several cassette tapes, then CDs, then flash drives. Michael raised an eyebrow. "He updated technology." Richard laughed. "He certainly tried." David wanted to make sure future devices could still play his recordings. I shook my head in disbelief. He actually thought that far ahead? He planned everything. That sentence no longer surprised me. David had always been a planner. Vacations, birthdays, retirement, apparently, even gifts delivered after his death. I carefully lifted another bundle. Letters, dozens of them. each tied with different colored ribbon. Some were addressed to me, others had no names. One simply read, "For the day Donna finally laughs again." Another said, "For the Christmas she thinks she's forgotten." I stared at that one. My heart tightened. He really had known. He had somehow predicted exactly how this morning would begin. Sarah quietly wiped away tears. "I feel terrible." I looked at her. "Why, I watched you get hurt this morning." She looked down. "I wanted to tell you everything." I gently squeezed her hand. "We'll talk about that later." She nodded. "Thank you." Underneath the letters rested several legal folders. Richard immediately reached toward them. "Those stay closed for now." I looked at him. "More instructions?" "Yes." I smiled weakly. "I'm beginning to think David planned every minute of today." Richard smiled. "He practically did." Then Olivia gasped. "Grandma?" "What is it?" She pointed toward the back of the chest. There, hidden behind the journals, sat an old portable voice recorder. Silver, slightly scratched, perfectly preserved. I picked it up carefully. A small label had been taped to the front, in David's handwriting. "Play when Donna is ready." I swallowed hard. "I don't think I'm ready." Richard nodded. "Neither did he." "What?" "He wrote that you would probably say exactly those words." I couldn't help smiling. He really knew me. He loved you deeply. I carefully placed the recorder beside the journals. There was still more inside. Near the bottom of the chest sat a velvet pouch. Inside, David's favorite pocket watch, the one I thought had been lost years before. My goodness. I held it carefully. It stopped. Richard looked at it. "No." He gently pressed the winding crown. Tick, tick, tick. The watch immediately came back to life. I laughed through my tears. "So did he. He serviced it every year." "I thought he'd lost it." "He hid it." "Why?" "He wanted you to find it today." I shook my head. This man never stopped planning. Everyone laughed quietly, for the first time all morning. The laughter felt natural, not forced, not nervous, real. Then Noah crawled closer to the chest. "Grandma." "Yes." "I think there's another box." I leaned forward. He was right. At the very bottom sat a beautifully carved wooden panel, different from the rest. Its edges were perfectly fitted, almost invisible unless you looked carefully. I pressed against it. Nothing happened. Richard frowned. "It shouldn't be there." "What do you mean? I've never seen that." "You've never opened this chest?" "Never. I promised David I wouldn't. So neither of us knows what's underneath." He slowly shook his head. "No." I examined the panel again. There was no handle, no keyhole, no visible latch, just smooth cedar. Olivia knelt beside me. "Maybe it slides." I tried. Nothing. Michael examined the edges. "No hinges." Sarah looked confused. "Dad never mentioned another compartment." Richard's expression changed. For the first time all day, he looked genuinely surprised. "I think—" He paused. "I think David kept one final secret." The room fell silent again. I rested my hand on the hidden compartment. Somewhere beneath that wooden panel, something waited. Something not even Richard knew existed. And suddenly, I realized the greatest mystery inside David's Christmas gift hadn't even been discovered yet. I ran my fingers across the hidden panel again. Smooth, perfectly fitted, almost invisible. David had spent his entire life making things with wood, and I suddenly realized something. "If David built this," I said quietly, Then he also built the lock. Richard looked at me. What do you mean? He never liked metal latches if he could hide them. A memory surfaced. Years ago, David had built Sarah a toy chest. No handle, no keyhole. The latch had been hidden inside a carved leaf. He loved little puzzles. I knelt beside the cedar chest. The carved pine branches along the bottom looked decorative at first glance. Now they looked intentional. I traced every groove with my fingertips. Olivia knelt beside me. What are you looking for, Grandma? Something your great-grandfather wanted us to find. Can I help? I smiled. I'd like that. The two of us examined every carving. Noah crawled over too. I'll help. Sarah laughed softly through her tears. Looks like you've got a search team. For the first time all morning, the room felt lighter. Not because the mystery had disappeared, because everyone was searching together. David would have loved that. Noah suddenly pointed at one of the carved pine cones. This one wiggles. We all looked. It does. I gently pressed it. Nothing happened. I twisted it slightly. Still nothing. Then I remembered something David used to tell his students during woodworking classes at the community center. Never force good craftsmanship. I smiled. I've got an idea. Instead of pushing, I gently pulled. Click. The entire pine cone shifted outward by less than an inch. Everyone gasped. Michael leaned closer. That was the latch. I smiled through my tears. I knew he'd hide it. The wooden panel slowly lifted by itself. Not completely, just enough for me to slide my fingers underneath. I carefully raised it. Silence filled the room. Inside the hidden compartment, there wasn't money. There wasn't jewelry. There wasn't a legal document. There was only one small velvet case, deep blue, barely larger than a paperback book. Richard frowned. I've never seen that. I believe you. He looked genuinely surprised. David had managed to keep one secret, even from the man protecting every other secret. I carefully lifted the case. It felt surprisingly light. My heart pounded. What if this is it? Sarah whispered. What? The final surprise. I don't know. The velvet looked untouched, almost new. A tiny envelope rested beneath it. Across the front, David had written only 3 words. Open first. I laughed quietly. Even now, he's giving instructions. Richard smiled. He knew you'd ignore them if he didn't. I opened the envelope. Inside was a single folded note. Donna. If you've reached this point, then you've trusted me one more time. Thank you. Before you open the blue case, I need you to understand something. Everything you found today belongs to our past. What comes next belongs to your future. Please don't think about what you've lost. Think about what still remains. Love always, David. I read the note twice, then a third time. What still remains. Those words echoed in my mind. For 12 years, I had focused almost entirely on what I had lost. My husband, our plans, our retirement together, the quiet evenings on the porch, the road trips we never took. Maybe David wanted me to stop looking backward. Maybe that had always been today's purpose. Sarah touched my shoulder. Mom! I looked up. You okay? I think so. You don't have to rush. I know. I wiped my eyes, then slowly opened the velvet case. Inside was a wedding ring. Not mine. David's. The same gold band I had placed in his hand before the funeral. I stared at it in complete disbelief. No, I whispered. It can't be. Richard looked equally confused. I've never seen that. I picked up the ring. Inside the band was an engraving I had never noticed before. Forever begins every day. I smiled through tears. That had been David, always romantic, always believing love was a daily decision. Sarah looked at me. I thought Dad was buried wearing it. So did I. Richard suddenly spoke. He wasn't. Everyone turned toward him. I almost forgot. You knew. Only part of it. He rubbed his forehead, trying to remember. The funeral director called me the night before the service. What happened? David had left written instructions? More instructions. Richard nodded. He requested that his wedding ring be removed before burial. I looked down at the ring in my hand. Why? Richard smiled sadly. He wrote. Richard paused, his own voice beginning to shake. I promised Donna forever. I can't keep that promise from underground. No one spoke. Even Noah sat quietly. I closed my fingers around the ring. My chest hurt. Not with grief, with love, the kind that somehow grows stronger even after death. Then I noticed something else inside the velvet box. A folded piece of paper, smaller than the others. I unfolded it carefully. It wasn't a letter. It was a receipt, dated almost 13 years earlier. At the bottom was the name of a local jeweler. Attached to the receipt was another handwritten note. Richard, if Donna ever finds this ring, ask her to wear it however she chooses. On a necklace, in her pocket, on her finger if she wants. I only ask one thing. Don't let it spend the rest of its life inside a drawer. It deserves better. So does she. David, I laughed softly. He always hated clutter. Richard chuckled. He certainly did. I slipped the ring onto my little finger. It didn't fit perfectly, but that didn't matter. For the first time in 12 years, I wasn't wearing something because I couldn't let go. I was wearing it because David wanted me to keep living. That felt different, healthier, hopeful. Michael broke the silence. So, is that everything? Before anyone answered, Richard slowly shook his head. No. I looked at him. What do you mean? He pointed toward the stack of journals. The chest wasn't built to preserve objects. Then what was it built for? Richard looked directly at me. It was built to tell David's story. I frowned. I don't understand. He wanted you to know what happened during the final months of his life. I was there. You were beside him. Richard's voice became gentle. But there were thoughts he never spoke aloud. I looked at the journals again. Year 1, Year 2, Year 3. Dozens of handwritten pages, questions, dreams, fears, memories, everything he had never said. Richard continued. He asked me to tell you one thing before you read the first journal. What? He said. Richard smiled through tears. Donna will probably think the journals are about dying. They aren't. Richard slowly shook his head. No. They're about living. I reached for the first journal. My hands trembled. Somewhere inside those pages, David's voice had been waiting 12 long years to speak to me again. I held the first journal as if it were made of glass. The leather cover was worn around the edges, not because of age alone, but because David had opened it hundreds of times. I could almost picture him sitting alone in his workshop writing one careful sentence after another. No one spoke. Even the fire seemed quieter. I slowly opened the cover. On the first page, there wasn't a diary entry. There was a title. For Donna, if tomorrow comes without me. I smiled through fresh tears. That sounds exactly like him. Sarah leaned closer. What does it say? I'll read it. I turned the page. The handwriting was steady. No sign that his body had already begun failing him. My beautiful Donna. If you're reading these pages, then I've already missed far too many mornings with you. Don't make the mistake of believing these journals are about my illness. Cancer took enough from us already. I refused to let it take our story. I stopped reading. My throat tightened. Richard quietly nodded. I told you, they're about living. I continued. The doctors keep asking what I regret. The answer surprises them. I don't regret working hard. I don't regret buying the little house instead of the big one. I don't regret old cars or secondhand furniture. I don't even regret getting sick. The only thing I regret is that I won't have enough time to convince Donna how extraordinary she really is. I lowered the journal. I can't. Sarah gently squeezed my arm. You can. I took a deep breath. For years, I'd believed I knew everything David wanted to say before he died. Now I realized how much he'd protected me from. I turned another page. This entry was dated nearly 11 months before his death. I watched Donna leave for school this morning before sunrise. She thinks I don't notice how tired she is. She kissed me goodbye, even though she thought I was asleep. She packed my lunch before making her own. Then she scraped ice off my truck because she knew my back hurt. If anyone ever tells me heroes don't exist, I'll tell them they never met my wife. My tears fell onto the page. I never knew he was awake. Richard smiled. He told me that story. He remembered something that small. He remembered everything. That sentence lingered in the room. David had always noticed little things. The coffee mug I preferred. The songs I hummed while cooking. Which flowers bloomed first every spring. He collected ordinary moments the way other people collected photographs. I kept reading. Each entry felt like another conversation we'd never had. One page described the day Sarah graduated nursing school. Another recalled the afternoon we danced in the kitchen because the radio played our wedding song. One entry simply listed 10 reasons he loved hearing me laugh. By the 5th page, everyone around me was crying. Even Michael quietly wiped his eyes. Then I reached an entry that made me laugh. Donna still hides chocolate in the flower container. She honestly believes I haven't figured it out. I replace the candy every few weeks, so she thinks she's eating the same stash. Marriage isn't about winning. It's about protecting each other's harmless little secrets. I burst into laughter. Real laughter. The kind that catches you by surprise. Sarah stared at me. What? I hid chocolate in the flour. She laughed too. I remember that. You knew. You weren't exactly subtle. I looked at Richard. Did everyone know? He grinned. Pretty much. I covered my face. I spent 20 years believing I was clever. The room filled with warm laughter. For the first time that Christmas morning, joy outweighed sadness. David had somehow managed to make us laugh from beyond the grave. Only he could do that. I closed the journal carefully. I'll read every page. Richard nodded. He hoped you would. But not today. No. There are too many emotions already. He understood. Some gifts can't be opened all at once. I carefully returned the journal to the table. Then my eyes drifted toward the stack of audio recordings. The old digital recorder sat beside them. David's handwriting was still visible. Play when Donna is ready. Sarah noticed where I was looking. Do you think now is the right time? I hesitated. I don't know. Richard spoke quietly. The recording isn't long. You've heard it. He shook his head. Never. You never listened. I promised David I wouldn't. I believed him. Every hour of this day had proved one thing. Richard had honored every promise. I picked up the recorder. It still had batteries inside. I pressed the power button. A tiny green light appeared. Everyone leaned closer. There was only one file stored inside. The screen displayed its name. Christmas morning. My heartbeat quickened. I looked around the room. Sarah nodded. Michael took her hand. Olivia sat cross-legged on the rug. Noah leaned against the couch, unusually quiet. Richard removed his glasses. He looked almost as nervous as I felt. I pressed play. Static filled the room. For one terrifying second, I thought the recording had been damaged. Then, I heard it. A familiar chuckle. Soft. Warm. Completely unmistakable. Well, David said, if this thing actually works, then I suppose technology finally cooperated with me? Everyone laughed through tears. It sounded exactly like him. I imagine Donna is rolling her eyes right now. I whispered automatically, You're right. The room smiled. David continued, Sweetheart, if you're hearing my voice, then you've waited much longer than either of us wanted. His voice was calm, not weak, not frightened, just calm. I wish I could tell you this in person, but life had other plans. I closed my eyes. For 12 years, I had dreamed of hearing his voice again. Nothing prepared me for how real it felt. I know you're probably crying. Please don't stay there too long. You are always too beautiful to spend your days crying. Sarah covered her mouth. Michael looked down. Noah whispered, It sounds like Great-Grandpa is here. In that moment, it almost felt true. David continued speaking. I need everyone listening to know something. Donna spent her whole life believing she was simply doing what any wife and mother would do. She was wrong. My heart pounded. She made sacrifices nobody asked for. She carried burdens she never talked about. She gave away dreams without complaining. If our family has anything good in it today, it's because she quietly built the foundation beneath all of us. The room became silent again. I couldn't stop crying. Not because I felt sad. Because for the first time in my life, someone had spoken aloud the things I'd always tried to hide. The recording paused for several seconds. Then David laughed softly. I should probably stop before Donna starts telling everyone I'm embarrassing her. I smiled. You still are. Then his tone changed, more serious. But I'm not finished yet. He paused. Because the greatest surprise is still waiting. The recording ended. No explanation. No clue. Only one final mystery. I stared at the silent recorder. The greatest surprise, I whispered. Richard looked just as confused as everyone else. I don't think he meant the journals. Or the ring, Sarah added. Michael slowly looked back toward the cedar chest. We've opened everything. Had we? I wasn't so sure anymore. David had spent 12 years staying one step ahead of all of us. Something told me. He still was. No one spoke after the recording ended. The silence wasn't empty. It was full. Full of memories. Full of love. Full of questions. I looked around the room. Every face carried the same expression. We all wanted David to keep talking. We all wanted one more sentence. One more laugh. One more piece of advice. Instead, the recorder sat quietly in my hands. Its tiny green light faded. It's over, Noah whispered. I smiled at him. The recording is? He tilted his head. But not Great-Grandpa. I looked toward the cedar chest. No, I don't think so. Richard slowly stood. I believe David expected this. What do you mean? He knew everyone would immediately start looking for another surprise. Sarah let out a small laugh. He knows us too well. He certainly did. I carefully placed the recorder back inside the chest. Then I looked around again. Something bothered me. David had said the greatest surprise was still waiting. Richard didn't know what it was. The journals weren't it. The ring wasn't it. The recorder wasn't it. So where was it? I glanced inside the chest one more time. It looked empty. Almost. Then Olivia suddenly pointed toward the bottom. Grandma, what is it? I think there's something stuck. I leaned closer. A tiny corner of yellowed paper peeked out beneath one side of the removable wooden panel. I hadn't noticed it before. Neither had anyone else. I carefully slid 2 fingers underneath. The paper refused to move. It's caught. Michael walked over. Let me help. Together, we gently lifted the removable panel completely out of the chest. Beneath it, there wasn't another compartment. There was only the solid cedar floor. Except, a thin envelope had somehow slipped underneath the panel years ago. Richard frowned. That wasn't supposed to happen. You've never seen this? No. I swear. I believed him. The envelope was dusty. Its edges had curled with age. It had clearly been trapped there since the day David built the chest. I carefully pulled it free. Across the front in David's familiar handwriting were 5 simple words. If this is found, smile. I laughed immediately. I knew it. Sarah smiled through tears. Dad couldn't resist. He loved hiding things. Richard chuckled. He once hid my birthday present inside my toolbox. Michael laughed. He sounds like a professional prankster. He was. I carefully opened the envelope. Inside, there wasn't another letter. Instead, a small folded sheet listed 12 dates. One Christmas for every year after David's death. Next to each date, he had written one prediction. I stared in disbelief. The first line read, Year 1. Donna will pretend to be strong for Sarah. That had happened exactly. The second year, 2. She'll forget to decorate the porch because Christmas will still hurt too much. I felt goosebumps. I had forgotten, but he hadn't. Year 3. She'll start smiling again because a child at school will remind her that hope survives grief. I whispered, Emily Turner. Sarah looked confused. Who? A little girl in my 3rd grade class. Emily had hugged me one December morning and whispered, Mrs. Jackson, Christmas still comes even when people go to heaven. I'd cried all afternoon. David had somehow predicted that healing would begin. I kept reading. Year 4, Year 5. Every prediction matched, not perfectly, but astonishingly close. Sometimes they described events, sometimes feelings, sometimes tiny habits. By year 9, my hands were shaking. How had he known? Then I reached the final prediction. Year 12. Donna will finally believe she can be happy again. I couldn't breathe. Today, this Christmas. He had written that sentence 12 years ago. Sarah softly asked, What else does it say? I turned the page over. There was only one sentence. I never predicted the future. I only believed in the woman I married. My tears returned, not from sadness, from understanding. David hadn't possessed some magical ability. He simply knew me, better than anyone, better than I knew myself. Richard quietly said, He always believed you'd survive this. I wasn't sure I would. He never doubted. I folded the paper carefully. I'll treasure this forever. Then Noah tugged gently on my sleeve. Grandma. Yes. You said great-grandpa liked hiding things. He did. So, he scratched his head. What if we're still looking in the wrong place? Every adult looked at him. What do you mean, buddy? Michael asked. Noah shrugged. The biggest surprise doesn't have to be inside the chest. The room became completely silent. Richard slowly blinked. He looked genuinely stunned. I never thought of that. Neither had I. We had all assumed the answer was hidden in the cedar chest, but David's recording hadn't actually said that. He had only said, "The greatest surprise is still waiting." Not where, not how. Sarah looked around the living room. What else did Dad leave? Richard frowned. I delivered everything I was instructed to deliver. The journals, the letters, the chest, the legal files, the recorder, the ring. He slowly stopped talking. His expression changed. What? I asked. I forgot something. What? Richard looked embarrassed. I honestly forgot. Forgot what? When I left home this morning? He rubbed his forehead. I placed one more envelope in my briefcase. Everyone stared at him. You what? I completely forgot. He hurried toward the chair where he'd left his coat. His leather briefcase still rested beside it. He opened it, searched through several folders, then slowly pulled out one final envelope. Unlike every other letter, this one wasn't old. The paper looked newer. The handwriting wasn't David's. It was Richard's. Across the front, he had written only deliver after the recording. Richard stared at it for several seconds. I can't believe I forgot. What is it? I don't know. You wrote it. I wrote the outside. But the contents, he carefully handed it to me, were sealed by David. My heartbeat quickened again. Another sealed envelope. Another step. Another mystery. I turned it over. The flap had never been opened. The wax seal remained untouched. Stamped into the wax was David's wedding ring. I looked at Richard. Should I open it? He nodded slowly. I think. He smiled. This may finally be the moment we've all been waiting for. I held the sealed envelope in both hands. No one spoke. The crackling fire seemed louder than ever. Richard watched me carefully. I've carried that envelope all morning, he said quietly. I can't believe I almost forgot it. You never opened it, I asked. He shook his head. David made me promise. You certainly kept a lot of promises. I owed him that much. I looked at the wax seal. David had pressed his wedding ring into the soft wax years ago. The imprint was still sharp. It felt wrong to break it. It also felt impossible not to. I slowly slipped my thumb beneath the flap. The wax cracked, a sound so small, yet somehow it echoed through the room. Inside was only one folded sheet of paper. No photographs, no legal papers, no keys. Just one page. I unfolded it carefully. My beautiful Donna, if you've reached this letter, then Richard finally remembered to give it to you. The room burst into laughter. Even Richard laughed. I can't believe he knew, Richard said, shaking his head. He always knew, I replied. I kept reading. I imagine everyone has spent the morning searching for one final surprise. I smiled. He's right again. I hate being predictable, Sarah muttered. David continued. Before I tell you anything else, I need every person in the room to do something for me. Look at Donna. The room grew quiet again. I slowly looked up. Every pair of eyes was already on me. Sarah, Michael, Olivia, Noah, Richard, all looking at me. I suddenly felt embarrassed. "What are you all staring at?" I asked. Sarah smiled through tears. "We're following instructions." I laughed softly. "So am I." I lowered my eyes back to the letter. For years, Donna believed she wasn't extraordinary. She believed she was simply doing what needed to be done. She'll probably argue with this letter. Don't let her. I shook my head. I would never argue. Sarah laughed. "Mom!" I smiled. "Okay, maybe a little." The letter continued. "I've spent months thinking about what gift I could leave my wife. Money disappears, jewelry gets locked away, even houses eventually belong to someone else. I wanted to leave something that could never be taken from her." I felt my heart beat slow. "What was it?" Olivia whispered. I continued reading. "So I decided to leave her the truth." My eyes stopped moving. The truth. I read the sentence again. Not money, not property. The truth. David continued. "Donna, you spent most of your life believing people only notice the loud moments. You were wrong. The quiet moments mattered more." I swallowed hard. "I noticed every lunch you packed. Every night you stayed awake worrying about Sarah. Every dollar you quietly saved. Every dream you postponed. Every time you smiled, even when your heart was breaking. You thought nobody saw. I saw." The words blurred beneath my tears. For years, I had never wanted recognition. I only wanted my family to be okay. Yet hearing those sacrifices spoken aloud somehow healed something inside me. David wasn't finished. When Sarah graduated nursing school, you stood in the back because you wanted every photograph to belong to her. I noticed. Sarah covered her mouth. When Michael asked for permission to marry our daughter, you quietly cried after everyone left because you were afraid the house would become too quiet. I noticed. Michael lowered his head. When Olivia was born, you spent 3 nights sleeping in an uncomfortable hospital chair because you wanted Sarah to rest. I noticed. Olivia reached over and hugged me. And when Noah took his first steps, you clapped louder than anyone because you always celebrated everyone else's victories before your own. I noticed. Noah smiled proudly. I remember learning to walk. Everyone laughed. You were 1 year old, Michael teased. I still remember. We laughed even harder. David had somehow brought joy into the room again. Then the tone of the letter changed. There is one more truth I need everyone to hear. I paused. The room became still. If anyone ever tells Donna she was lucky to have me, correct them. My breathing caught. The truth is, I was the lucky one. I couldn't hold back anymore. I cried openly, not quiet tears. Real tears, the kind that come from somewhere deep inside your soul. Sarah wrapped her arms around me. I love you, Mom. I love you too. Michael quietly added, we all do. I nodded, but couldn't speak. David's words continued. I married a woman who made ordinary life feel extraordinary. I watched her become a mother who never stopped giving. Then I watched her become a grandmother who somehow found even more love to give. If heaven truly lets us watch the people we love, then I already know exactly where I'll be looking. No one moved. No one interrupted. The room felt full, not with sadness, with love. Then I reached the final paragraph. The greatest surprise I promised isn't hidden in this chest. It isn't inside these journals. It isn't the ring. It isn't even my voice. The greatest surprise is that you were never as alone as you believed. I frowned. What did he mean? I continued. Look around the room. Every person standing there carries part of my love for you. Richard kept my promise. Sarah protected my secret. Michael carried burdens that weren't his. Olivia and Noah reminded you how to laugh again. You thought I left you 12 years ago. Donna, I never asked them to replace me. I only asked them to remind you that love doesn't disappear when a heartbeat does. Silence. Absolute silence. Then Sarah broke down completely. I'm so sorry. She hugged me tightly. I hated lying to you this morning. I know. I almost told you. I know. I thought you'd never forgive me. I gently touched her face. There isn't anything to forgive. She cried harder. I made you think we'd forgotten you. I smiled. For about 10 minutes? She laughed through tears. Worst 10 minutes of my life. Richard quietly stood. I should apologize too. I looked at him. For what? For staying away all these years. I shook my head. You weren't abandoning us. No. I was keeping a promise. For the first time since he walked through my front door, I believed him completely. I walked across the room. Without saying another word, I hugged him. He froze, then slowly hugged me back. I've wanted to do that for 20 years, he whispered. So have I. Across the room, Olivia smiled. Noah clapped. Michael slipped an arm around Sarah. I looked toward the cedar chest one more time. That morning, I believed it had delivered the greatest gift of my life. Now I understood something different. The chest had never been the gift. It had simply opened our hearts long enough for the truth to finally reach them. I looked at the unopened envelope one more time. It suddenly occurred to me that every important moment that morning had begun with silence. The truck, David's first letter, the cedar chest, the recording, and now, this envelope. I smiled weakly. David certainly knew how to keep everyone waiting. Richard laughed. He would have made a terrible magician. Why? He always smiled before revealing the trick. For the first time that day, I noticed something. I was smiling too, not forcing it, not pretending, actually smiling. I gently opened the envelope. Inside was another letter. Only one page. The handwriting was unmistakably David's. My dear family, if Donna has reached this letter, then I already know one thing. She has forgiven all of you. I looked around. Sarah immediately started crying again. I hoped he was right. I reached for her hand. He is. She squeezed mine tightly. David continued. Sarah, you're probably blaming yourself. Please stop. Sarah covered her face. He knew. He always knew, I whispered. The letter continued. You hated this plan from the beginning. You argued with me, more than once. Sarah looked at Richard. I did. Richard nodded. 3 separate times. She laughed through tears. I remember. David's words continued. You told me Mom will think I don't love her. I told you she'll understand one day. If you're reading this now, that day has finally arrived. Sarah couldn't stop crying. She wrapped both arms around me. I'm so sorry. I kissed the top of her head. I know why you did it. I still hated every minute. I know. I almost ruined the surprise last Thanksgiving. Richard laughed. You nearly did. Michael smiled. I had to distract Donna for 20 minutes while Sarah calmed down. I looked at both of them. You've been carrying this secret together. Michael nodded. For years. I never suspected. You weren't supposed to. David continued. Michael, thank you. Michael looked startled. He wrote to me, You became the son I always hoped I'd have. Take care of my girls, especially when they become stubborn. Everyone laughed. Michael grinned. Too late, David continued. I know Donna is probably rolling her eyes. I laughed. I am. Sarah smiled. Told you. The letter went on. Richard, if you're still standing beside my family, then you kept your promise. I'm sorry I asked you to disappear. It wasn't fair, but I needed someone outside our daily lives to protect this plan. Thank you for carrying that burden. Richard quietly removed his glasses. He wiped away tears. I'd do it again. I know you would, I whispered. The room fell silent again. Then I reached the next paragraph. My grandchildren, if you're old enough to understand these words, please remember something. Olivia sat up straighter. Noah leaned against my chair. Your grandmother has spent her life giving away pieces of herself to make other people stronger. One day, when she's older, she'll pretend she doesn't need anything. Don't believe her. Olivia laughed. That's true. I smiled. Apparently. David continued. She'll say, I'm fine. Ask again. She'll say, don't worry about me. Ignore her. She'll tell you not to spend money on gifts. Don't listen. Noah looked at me. You really do say those things. I laughed. I guess I do. David's final advice to them was simple. Never wait until funerals to tell people they're loved. No one moved. That sentence landed heavily. I thought about all the things people leave unsaid because they assume tomorrow will come. David had refused to leave those words unsaid. Then I reached the final section. It was addressed only to me. My Donna. You've spent 12 years trying to be brave. You don't have to prove anything anymore. You already kept every promise you ever made me. You raised Sarah into an incredible woman. You welcomed Michael into our family. You became the grandmother I knew you would become. Now, it's your turn. I frowned. My turn, I continued reading. It's your turn to dream again. Travel somewhere. Take painting lessons. Plant another garden. Eat dessert first once in a while. Stop apologizing for buying yourself new shoes. Live. Not because you've forgotten me, but because you've remembered everything I tried to teach you. I smiled through tears. How many times had I walked past a travel brochure and quietly put it back? How many hobbies had I postponed? How many little joys had I convinced myself were unnecessary? Too many. David wasn't asking me to stop loving him. He was asking me to start loving life again. The final paragraph was short, almost playful. I have one last request. Tonight, after everyone goes home, stand on the back porch, look at the stars, talk to me. You won't hear my voice, but you'll already know what I'd say. Love always, David. I folded the letter carefully. No one rushed to speak. Eventually, Sarah broke the silence. Mom? Yes. I've been carrying something for years. What is it? Guilt. She took a deep breath. The first time Richard contacted me, I almost refused to help. I understand. I told him I wouldn't lie to you. Richard nodded. She absolutely refused. Sarah smiled sadly. Then he showed me Dad's handwritten instructions. She looked at me. I spent the whole night reading them. You did. There were pages explaining why Dad wanted this Christmas to happen exactly this way. I remembered the outline of David's plan. He had predicted I would one day feel forgotten. He hadn't wanted that pain to last. He wanted it to become the doorway to something greater. Sarah continued. I still argued. I believe that. She laughed softly. I told Dad, even in a letter, that he was asking too much. What changed your mind? She looked directly into my eyes. I found another sentence. What sentence? She smiled through tears. It said, Sarah, your mother has spent a lifetime giving everyone else unforgettable Christmases. Please help me give her one. I covered my mouth. There was nothing left to forgive. Nothing. Only gratitude. I stood up and pulled Sarah into another hug. I love you. I love you too. She whispered into my shoulder. Merry Christmas, Mom. For the first time that day, those 3 words felt complete. The room slowly settled into a peaceful silence. For the first time all morning, nobody was searching for another hidden compartment or another sealed envelope. David had given us something greater than another surprise. He had given us permission to speak honestly. I looked around the living room. The cedar chest remained open. The journals rested neatly beside it. His wedding ring still circled my little finger. The Christmas tree lights reflected softly against the windows. Outside, snow continued falling. Inside, our family finally stopped hiding from each other. Richard cleared his throat. There are still a few things David asked me to do. I smiled. I thought we were finally finished. So did I. He reached into the legal folder we had ignored all morning. This part isn't about money. Good. He laughed. I knew you'd say that. He removed several sealed envelopes. Each one had a different name. One for Sarah, one for Michael, one for Olivia, one for Noah. My heart tightened when I saw the children's names. David wrote to them. Richard nodded. Years before they were even born. Olivia's eyes grew wide. How could he know me? Richard smiled. He didn't know your face. But he already loved you? Noah tilted his head. So great-grandpa knew I'd exist. He hoped you would. Richard handed Olivia her envelope first. She looked at me. Grandma, should I read it? I nodded. I think your great-grandfather would like that. She carefully opened it. The paper crackled softly. Then she began reading aloud. Dear granddaughter, if you're reading this, then you already know something important. Your grandmother loves with her whole heart. One day you'll notice that she remembers everyone's birthday favorite pie and how they like their coffee. Pay attention. That's what real love looks like. Olivia stopped reading. Tears filled her eyes. That's exactly you. I smiled. I guess your great-grandfather paid attention too. She continued. If you ever wonder how to become a strong woman, watch your grandmother. Not because she never cries, but because she always chooses kindness after she does. Olivia folded the letter and hugged me tightly. I love you, Grandma. I love you too. Richard then handed Noah his envelope. Noah opened it without hesitation. He frowned. There are lots of words. Michael laughed. I'll help. Noah climbed into his father's lap. Michael began reading. Dear grandson, I hope you're the kind of little boy who asks too many questions. Everyone laughed. That's definitely Noah, Sarah said. Michael kept reading. If everyone tells you to stop asking why, don't. Curiosity builds better men. Noah grinned proudly. I ask why all the time. We noticed, Sarah teased. Michael continued. When you're old enough, please help your grandmother carry groceries even when she says she can manage. Trust me, she'll insist she doesn't need help. Noah looked at me seriously. I'll always help. I know you will. He wrapped his little arms around me. Then Richard picked up Michael's envelope. Michael hesitated before opening it. I've never had a father write me a letter. His voice became quiet. My dad wasn't around much. Sarah gently squeezed his shoulder. Michael unfolded the page. He read silently at first, then smiled, then laughed, then quietly wiped away tears. "What does it say?" I asked. He looked up. He thanked me. For what? For loving Sarah. His voice cracked. He wrote. Michael looked back at the letter. "You don't become part of this family by marrying my daughter. You become part of this family by making her feel safe." Michael couldn't continue for several seconds. Finally, he whispered, "I tried." I reached over and touched his arm. "You succeeded." Sarah leaned over and kissed him. "You absolutely did." Richard picked up the final envelope, Sarah's. She stared at it for several moments before opening it. "I've waited years for this." Her hands shook slightly. She unfolded the letter. Unlike everyone else, she didn't read aloud immediately. She read silently. Halfway down the page, she burst into tears, not quiet tears, deep sobs. I moved closer. "Honey." She handed me the letter. "I can't." I looked down. David had written, "Sarah, you spent your childhood worrying that I worked too much. Then you spent my illness worrying that I hurt too much. After I'm gone, please don't spend the rest of your life worrying that you didn't do enough. You already gave me everything a father could ever ask for. You loved me." I looked at Sarah. She had blamed herself ever since David died. She always wondered if she'd visited enough, called enough, done enough. David had known. He continued, "One more thing. Please don't let guilt become the family tradition I leave behind. Replace it with gratitude." Sarah covered her face. "I've carried guilt for 12 years. I wrapped my arms around her. Then today is the day you put it down." She nodded against my shoulder. "I want to." "Your father wanted that too." Richard quietly waited until Sarah calmed herself. Then he picked up one final envelope. It had no name, only one sentence, "For every Jackson yet to come." I frowned. "A family letter." Richard nodded. David asked that everyone read it together. He handed it to me. "This one belongs to all of you." I unfolded the final page. The handwriting looked exactly the same. Steady, patient, hopeful. "To every child, grandchild, and great-grandchild who carries our family name, you may never meet me. That's all right. Families aren't built by memories alone. They're built by choices." I looked around. Everyone listened quietly. Choose honesty over pride. Choose forgiveness before resentment grows roots. Choose dinner together whenever life allows it. Call your parents more often than seems necessary. Visit your grandparents before it's too late. Celebrate ordinary Tuesdays, not just holidays. And never measure love by the size of a wrapped gift. I smiled. How fitting. This entire Christmas had begun because of one missing present. David continued. If one Christmas morning someone believes they've been forgotten, don't buy them something expensive. Sit beside them. Listen to them. Remind them they matter. That will always be the greater gift. No one spoke. The room felt completely still. Outside, snow continued falling over our little Vermont town. Inside, 3 generations of our family sat together around a cedar chest built by a man who refused to let love end with his life. I carefully folded the final family letter, then looked at everyone. "I think your father just gave us our new Christmas tradition." Sarah smiled. "No expensive gifts. Just honest hearts." Michael nodded. "I like that." Olivia smiled. "So do I." Noah grinned. "Can we still have cookies?" Everyone burst into laughter. I laughed harder than I had in years, because somehow, That sounded exactly like something David would have asked. The afternoon passed without any of us noticing. Christmas dinner had long since grown cold on the kitchen counter. No one seemed to care. Somehow, the meal we had planned for weeks had become less important than the conversations we'd waited years to have. Richard was helping Noah stack empty boxes in the corner. Sarah was carefully placing David's journals back inside the cedar chest. Olivia sat beside me, slowly polishing David's pocket watch with a soft cloth. It felt like each of us had quietly found a job. Not because the work needed doing, because none of us wanted the day to end. I looked out the window. Snow covered the backyard in a perfect blanket of white. The old maple tree stood exactly where David and I had planted it 38 years earlier. He had dug the hole. I had complained it was too deep. He laughed and said, "One day this tree will shade grandchildren we haven't even met." I smiled. He had been right. Again. Olivia noticed me staring outside. "What are you thinking about?" "Your great-grandfather." "I wish I could have met him." I wrapped my arm around her shoulders. "You have." She looked confused. "What do you mean?" I pointed toward the cedar chest. "You've heard his voice." She nodded. "You've read his words." Another nod. "You've laughed at his jokes." She smiled. "And today?" I gently tapped her heart. "He found a place to live in here." Olivia looked down for a moment, then quietly whispered, "I think you're right." Across the room, Sarah was reading one of David's journals. She suddenly laughed. "Mom, what is it?" "You have to hear this." She turned the journal toward me. "Dad wrote about the day you tried to paint the living room." I immediately groaned. "Oh no." Michael laughed. "This sounds good already." Sarah began reading. Donna announced she could paint the entire living room herself in one afternoon. 3 hours later, she accidentally painted the television remote blue. She blamed the paintbrush. I blamed gravity. She blamed me. The entire room burst into laughter. "I never painted the remote?" Sarah looked at me over the journal. "Mom?" "What? It literally still has blue paint on it." Everyone laughed harder. Even I couldn't argue. "Fine. I painted the remote." Richard wiped tears from laughing. "David told me that story." "He did." "He laughed for 20 minutes. I shook my head. "I married a man who never let me forget my mistakes." Richard smiled. "He didn't remember your mistakes. He remembered your adventures." That sounded much kinder, and much more like David. Sarah continued turning pages. Every few minutes, she found another funny memory. One described how I burned Thanksgiving rolls because I was dancing in the kitchen. Another recalled David pretending not to know I'd bought him a fishing rod 6 weeks before Christmas because he saw the receipt sticking out of my purse. Another simply read, "Donna still thinks whispering makes surprises quieter." It doesn't. I laughed until my sides hurt. "So, I wasn't nearly as mysterious as I believed." "Apparently not." Michael grinned. The journals weren't becoming sadder. They were becoming happier. Every page reminded us that David had refused to spend his final months counting what he was losing. Instead, he counted everything he had loved. That realization changed something inside me. For years, I'd measured those final months by hospital visits, chemotherapy, doctor appointments, fear. David had measured them by laughter, family dinners, ordinary mornings, the sound of my voice. I suddenly understood why he'd titled the journals the way he had. They weren't about dying. They were about living well until the very last day. Richard quietly sat beside me. "I've been wanting to ask you something." "What? Are you angry with David?" The question surprised me. "No. Not even a little," I thought carefully. "No? You don't wish he'd simply told you all this while he was alive?" I smiled. I've thought about that. And if he had, I looked around the room. This day would have never happened. Richard nodded slowly. I suppose you're right. The surprise wasn't really the chest. No? It was watching all of us become a family again. Richard looked toward Sarah. I lost 20 years with all of you. I shook my head. You didn't lose today. He smiled sadly. No. I didn't. Sarah overheard us. She walked over carrying another journal. Uncle Richard. He looked up. Yes? I don't want another 20 years to pass. His eyes filled immediately. They won't. I'd like you to come next Christmas. He laughed softly. I'd like that too. Michael added, How about Thanksgiving first? Richard smiled wider. I'd love that. Olivia grinned. You can teach me woodworking. I'd be honored. Noah jumped in. And fishing. Richard laughed. I haven't fished in years. You'll remember. I hope so. Watching them talk, I realized David had quietly healed another broken relationship. Not through arguments, not through guilt, simply by giving people a reason to come together. That had always been his gift. Bringing people to the same table, even after he was gone. A little later, Michael finally looked toward the untouched dining table. We should probably eat. Everyone laughed. Sarah looked embarrassed. I completely forgot dinner. So did I. I think we all did. The turkey was cold. The mashed potatoes had hardened. The gravy definitely needed reheating. None of it mattered. Michael carried everything into the kitchen. I'll warm it up. Sarah stood. I'll help. Within minutes, the kitchen filled with familiar sounds. Plates, silverware, microwave doors, laughter, conversation. It sounded like Christmas again. Real Christmas. Not because everything was perfect, because everyone was present. While Sarah reheated dinner, I quietly walked toward the cedar chest one last time. I gently closed the lid. The soft thump echoed through the room. Not like an ending, more like a promise. I rested my hand on the polished cedar. Thank you. No one asked who I was talking to. They already knew. As I turned back toward my family, something caught my eye. The old calendar hanging beside the refrigerator. Today's date, December 25th. Exactly 1 week after my official retirement ceremony. I suddenly remembered what Richard had shown me. One of the trust conditions. Donna Jackson must officially retire from teaching. I looked at Richard. So that's why this year. He nodded. David believed you'd finally slow down. I laughed. He underestimated how stubborn I am. Richard smiled. No. He understood exactly how stubborn you are, so he knew retirement would be the first time I'd finally have room in my life for something like today. Exactly. For 12 years, the gift hadn't been late. It had been waiting for the exact moment David believed I would finally be ready to receive it. And somehow, he had been right once again. Christmas ended. But the story David began that morning didn't. It quietly followed us into the weeks that came after. For the first time since retiring, I woke up without an alarm clock. The house felt different. Not empty, peaceful. I made coffee and walked into the living room. The cedar chest sat beside the fireplace. I smiled every time I looked at it, not because it reminded me that David was gone, because it reminded me he had never stopped loving me. Every morning I read one journal entry, never more than one. I wanted to savor them. Some entries made me laugh. Some made me cry. Some simply made me sit quietly with my coffee staring out the window. One morning, I read something that stayed with me all day. Donna never notices lonely people because she notices everyone. At first, I laughed. Then I thought about it. David was right. Every Christmas Eve, I baked extra cookies. Not because our family ate that many, because I always carried plates to neighbors who lived alone. After church, I'd stop by Mrs. Reynolds' apartment. I'd bring soup to old Mr. Campbell after his wife passed away. I never thought much about it. I simply knew what loneliness felt like. David had noticed. Of course he had. That afternoon, I drove into town, just to clear my mind. Downtown looked exactly as it always had. Small shops, the old bookstore, the bakery that smelled like cinnamon, people carrying shopping bags. Then I noticed something. An elderly woman sat alone on a park bench. She wasn't waiting for anyone. She was simply watching families walk past. I recognized that expression. I had worn it myself, especially after David died. The feeling of being surrounded by people, yet somehow alone. I walked over. "Mind if I sit?" She smiled. "I'd like that." We talked for almost an hour. Her name was Eleanor. She had lost her husband 5 years earlier. Her children lived across the country. She quietly admitted something. This was the first Christmas anyone asked how I was doing. Those words stayed with me. When I returned home, I couldn't stop thinking about them. That evening, Sarah stopped by. She noticed I looked distracted. "What are you thinking about?" I told her about Eleanor. Sarah listened quietly. When I finished, she smiled. "You've got that look." "What look?" "The one Dad used to get." I laughed. "What does that mean?" "It means you're planning something." Maybe I was. The next morning, I opened David's journal again, completely by chance. The next entry read, "If Donna ever has extra time, she'll spend it helping someone else. That's one of the reasons I love her." I laughed out loud. "You're impossible." It felt as though David was still gently pushing me forward. Not backward, forward. That afternoon, I called Sarah. "I've got an idea." "I knew it. I want to start something." "What?" "A Christmas fund." She paused. "For children." "No, for seniors." She waited. "I met a woman yesterday. I told her everything." Then I added, "I keep thinking about how many people spend Christmas completely alone." Sarah didn't hesitate. "Let's do it." "Really?" "Absolutely." Within a week, Michael joined us. "So what's the plan?" I smiled. "We help widows and widowers and anyone who has no family nearby." Michael nodded. "I can organize volunteers." Sarah smiled. "I'll contact the hospital. I know several social workers." Richard called 2 days later. "I heard about your idea." Sarah had already told him. "What do you think?" "I think David would be smiling." "I hope so. I'd like to help." "You would?" "I've spent 30 years practicing law." He laughed softly. "I suppose I can handle paperwork." "You're hired." He laughed. "Good." By February, something incredible had happened. Our tiny idea became a real organization. Churches joined, the high school volunteered, local grocery stores donated food. The bakery promised pies, the florist donated centerpieces. People wanted to help. They simply needed someone to ask. One afternoon, Olivia looked at our growing list of volunteers. "Grandma?" "Yes." "Can I help too?" "Of course." "What should I do?" I smiled. "You write cards." "What kind?" "The kind people keep." She thought for a moment. "I can do that." She wrote every card by hand. Noah insisted on helping too. "I'll carry boxes." "You sure?" "I'm strong." He flexed his tiny arms. Everyone laughed. Michael quietly whispered, "I think we've got our youngest volunteer." By the following Christmas, something amazing happened. More than 60 seniors received visits, meals, gifts, conversations, not expensive presents, time, exactly as David had written. One stop changed me forever. We visited Eleanor, the woman from the park bench. She opened the door and immediately began crying. I never thought anyone would remember. I smiled. We remembered. She looked at all of us, Sarah, Michael, Olivia, Noah, Richard, then me. You brought your whole family. I nodded. We did. She whispered something I'll never forget. This feels like Christmas. Not because of gifts, because she wasn't alone anymore. That night, after everyone returned home, I stood in front of the cedar chest. I think we finally understood your gift. David hadn't simply left me memories. He had left me purpose. The chest had healed my heart. Now, that healing was spreading to other people, just as he hoped it would. A few days later, Richard visited again. He placed a small package beside the cedar chest. What's this? I found it while cleaning my attic. I opened it. Inside lay one final woodworking tool, David's favorite carving knife. I looked at Richard. He wanted you to have it. Why now? Richard smiled. I finally figured it out. What? He wasn't asking you to preserve the past. He was asking you to keep creating. I ran my fingers along the worn wooden handle. Maybe one day I'd learn to carve. Maybe I'd make Christmas ornaments for Olivia and Noah. Maybe I'd continue something David started. Not because I could replace him, because love grows best when it's passed forward. Another Christmas arrived. 1 year had passed since the morning Sarah looked at me and said, "Mom, we didn't buy you a present." I smiled every time I remembered those words. Not because they had hurt, because I finally understood them. She had told the truth. She and Michael really hadn't bought me a Christmas present. They didn't need to. The greatest gift had already been waiting for me. For 12 years. Prepared by the man who knew my heart better than anyone ever would. Our living room looked different now. The cedar chest still stood beside the fireplace, but it was no longer closed. Every Christmas season we opened it. Not to search for more surprises, to remember. Olivia carefully hung one of David's handmade ornaments on the tree. Noah proudly placed another near the top. Richard sat in David's old recliner, pretending not to cry every time he looked around the room. Sarah carried hot chocolate into the living room. Michael followed with fresh cinnamon rolls. Some traditions had changed. Others had simply grown. I looked around at everyone. The room felt full, not crowded, complete. Sarah sat beside me. Mom? Yes? Can I ask you something? Always. What was your favorite part of last Christmas? I laughed softly. Only one, try. I looked toward the cedar chest, then toward my family, then back at the Christmas tree. Finally, I answered. It wasn't the chest. She smiled. I knew you'd say that. It wasn't the journals. The ring. I shook my head. No. The recording? No. She looked surprised. Then what? I reached over and took her hand. My favorite part, I looked around the room again, was watching all of us become honest. Sarah's eyes filled with tears. We should have done that years ago. Maybe. But sometimes people need the right moment. Michael nodded. Dad created that moment. He certainly did. Richard quietly stood. I've got something. Everyone looked toward him. He walked over carrying a small wooden box. "I've been working on this all year." He handed it to me. "For you." I opened it carefully. Inside rested 6 tiny hand-carved Christmas ornaments. Each one represented something from the previous Christmas: a cedar chest, a wedding ring, a journal, a little envelope, a pocket watch, and a delivery truck. I laughed so hard I nearly cried. "The truck?" Richard grinned. "It started everything." "It certainly did." Olivia smiled. "We should hang them every year." "I think that's a wonderful idea." Noah picked up the tiny truck. "I remember that day." "So do I. I thought Grandma was getting a boat." The room exploded with laughter. Even now, a year later, the memory still made us laugh. Michael carefully hung the truck ornament on the tree. "There. It belongs." I watched it sway gently beneath the lights. Then Sarah handed me another envelope. I stared at her. "Oh no." She laughed. "Relax. I don't think I can survive another family secret." "There isn't one." "You promise?" "I absolutely promise." I opened it. Inside was a single photograph, taken without my knowledge. I smiled immediately. It showed me standing beside Eleanor the previous Christmas. The two of us were laughing together outside her apartment. On the back, Sarah had written, "Dad was right. You still notice lonely people. Thank you for teaching us to do the same." I looked up. "When did you take this?" Michael smiled. I stepped outside for about 30 seconds. "You sneaky man." "I learned from David." We all laughed. That evening, our Christmas fund served more than 100 elderly neighbors. Some received meals. Some received warm blankets. Some simply received company. Every volunteer wore a small wooden ornament shaped like David's cedar chest. Not because anyone knew his story, because his kindness had quietly become something larger than our family. As evening settled over Vermont, everyone eventually headed home. The house became quiet again, just as David had predicted years earlier. I looked at the clock. Almost 9. I suddenly remembered the last request in his letter. "Stand on the back porch, look at the stars, talk to me." I quietly slipped on my coat, opened the back door. The cold winter air wrapped around me. Snow covered the yard. The old maple tree stood silently beneath the moonlight. Above me, hundreds of stars filled the sky. I smiled. "Well," I whispered, "I finally did it." The words felt strangely natural. I traveled a little. I started carving. I made new friends. I laughed again. I even bought myself new shoes. I laughed softly. "You would have been proud." The wind gently moved through the trees. Of course, there was no answer. I hadn't expected one. Then I remembered the final line of David's letter. "You won't hear my voice, but you'll already know what I'd say." I closed my eyes, and somehow I did. I could almost hear him laughing, almost hear him teasing me for wearing shoes that actually matched my coat, almost hear him reminding me not to stay outside too long because I'd catch a cold. I smiled, not because I imagined he was standing beside me, because I no longer needed to imagine. Love had already done its work. It had changed me. It had changed Sarah. It had healed Richard. It had given Olivia and Noah a legacy far greater than money. The greatest Christmas gift had never been hidden inside cedar wood. It had been hidden inside ordinary people who chose each other. I looked toward the warm lights glowing inside my home. Sarah was washing dishes. Michael was drying them. Olivia was helping Noah untangle Christmas lights. Richard was pretending he wasn't stealing another cinnamon roll. Family. Messy, imperfect, beautiful. I smiled toward the stars one last time. Merry Christmas, David. Then I quietly added, you were right. Love really can outlive goodbye. I turned and walked back inside. Not because I was leaving him behind, because home was exactly where he had always wanted me to be. Sometimes we spend so much time worrying about the gifts under the tree that we forget the greatest gifts are often the people sitting around it. For many years, I believed love had left my home the day I lost my husband. I couldn't have been more wrong. Love had simply changed its form. It lived in the sacrifices we made for one another, in the promises we kept, even when they were difficult, in the forgiveness we chose over resentment, and in the memories we continued creating, instead of only mourning the ones we'd lost. Life has a way of convincing us that we have more time to say, I love you, more time to visit our parents, more time to forgive a misunderstanding, more time to thank the people who quietly carry us through life. But the truth is, tomorrow is never guaranteed. If this story has taught me anything, it's this: don't wait for the perfect moment to love someone. Don't assume they already know how much they mean to you. Tell them. Call them. Visit them. Hug them a little longer. Sit beside them, even when no words are needed. And if you're the one who feels forgotten today, please remember this. Your value has never been measured by the number of presents with your name on them. The people who truly love you may not always express it perfectly, but genuine love is built over years of quiet sacrifices, shared laughter, forgiveness, and unwavering presence. Christmas isn't really about what's wrapped in paper. It's about the hearts that gather around the tree. Those are the gifts that last forever. If this story touched your heart, I'd truly love to hear from you. Please share your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever received a gift that meant far more than money could ever buy? Or is there someone you wish you could spend just one more Christmas with? And before you go, tell me where you're watching from and what time it is where you are. I always enjoy seeing how far these stories travel and hearing from friends all around the world. If you enjoy heartfelt family stories like this, please don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and join us for more stories about love, hope, forgiveness, and the beautiful ways families find each other again. Merry Christmas, and may your home always be filled with the kind of love that never fades.